DC General Hospital spoilers reveal that Willow Tate had endured lies before. She had been manipulated, gaslit, used, and discarded in more ways than she could count. But nothing could have prepared her for the horror she felt the moment she uncovered the truth. Drew Kane had been controlling Wiley. It wasn't just influence or suggestion, it was deliberate. Calculated manipulation. Drew had been subtly altering the boy's perceptions, implanting ideas, steering his behavior, and crafting a carefully curated narrative that served one purpose: complete control. Wiley, the boy Willow had once believed would be the light to pull her out of the darkness, had become just another pawn in Drew's expanding web of deceit. And this time, it was unforgivable. It was something deeper, more visceral. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a desecration of the one pure connection she had left in the world. The moment Willow pieced it together, everything snapped into focus with terrifying clarity. Every excuse Drew had given, every interaction he had manipulated, every look, every word, all suddenly made sense through a sinister lens. The subtle delays in her visits. Wiley's shifting tone when speaking about Michael. The suspicious clinic denials and Drew's strange evasions. It had all been orchestrated, not to protect her, not to guide her, but to control her. To bend her reality until she no longer recognized the life she had fought so hard to preserve. What Drew had done wasn't just psychological manipulation, it was emotional warfare. And Willow had finally woken up in the heart of the battlefield. This new knowledge didn't trigger immediate grief. Instead, it unlocked something far more dangerous: cold, calculated resolve. A new obsession began to take root in Willow's mind, not to escape, not to forgive, but to destroy. Drew had stripped her of agency, rewritten the truth, and used the one person she would have given her life for. That act alone marked the line that could never be uncrossed. If he was capable of manipulating Wiley, of turning an innocent child into leverage, then he was capable of anything. And if no one else could see it, Willow would make them see. She began to move differently. Her words became measured. Her tone controlled, but her eyes burned with silent fire. Friends noticed the shift but couldn't name it. Sasha, still reeling from her own psychological torment, began to suspect that Willow wasn't simply unraveling, she was recalibrating. The woman who once sought peace, understanding, and redemption was now driven by a single, icy motivation: retribution. Willow was no longer trying to survive Drew's world, she was preparing to burn it to the ground. She knew that confronting him directly would be meaningless. Drew would deflect, deny, spin truths into illusions as he always had. No, this had to be precise, clinical, final. She started collecting proof: text messages, surveillance logs, fragments of conversations that she once brushed off as innocuous. She interviewed Wiley under the guise of bedtime stories and gentle talks, deciphering how deep the manipulation ran. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Drew had turned Wiley into a tool, emotional leverage to keep Willow tethered, to keep her compliant. And now, she was done being compliant. The obsession consumed her. Dreams turned to visions of confrontation. Her waking hours were filled with rehearsed speeches that ended in Drew's downfall. But beneath the plans, beneath the fury, was something darker still, a hunger to make Drew feel the same powerlessness she had felt. She didn't just want him exposed. She wanted him broken. She wanted him afraid. Because nothing terrified her more than knowing she had been fooled so completely by someone who had smiled at her, held her hand, and whispered that she was safe. The trauma of that betrayal didn't make her collapse, it made her sharp, merciless, strategic. And in that transformation, a new fear began to form, not for herself, but for what she might become. Because to stop Drew, truly stop him, she would have to descend into his world. She would have to lie, manipulate, cross lines that once defined who she was. But Willow had already lost her marriage, her child, her integrity. What more was there to protect? If justice required her to become the thing she feared, then so be it. In her eyes, that would still be cleaner than what Drew had done. And so she moved forward, one careful step at a time. She planted seeds of doubt in Sunny's camp, leaked partial truths to Sasha and Michael, and watched as Drew's carefully maintained illusion began to fracture. He didn't see it yet, but the noose was tightening. Willow, the woman once mocked for her fragility, had become the architect of his undoing. In the quiet moments, she still heard Wiley's voice, the way it had shifted, the way it echoed Drew's language. It haunted her. Not because she feared for Wiley's future, but because she knew exactly what kind of man Drew really was. And now, she knew exactly what she had to do to end him. The obsession wasn't fleeting. It had settled into her bones. It had rewired her grief into strategy, her heartbreak into fury. She was no longer the woman standing in the ruins, she was the flame that would burn the ruins into ash. Drew thought he had broken her. But what he had actually done, was awaken something far more dangerous than he could ever imagine. Willow was no longer afraid. She was ready. And for the first time in a long time, she felt powerful. And Drew? He was already dead. He just didn't know it yet. The transformation of Drew is no longer a quiet suspicion lingering in the corners of Willow's mind, it is now a deafening, undeniable reality that wraps around her like a vice. The man she once clung to for stability, for love, for redemption, has evolved into something unrecognizable. His charm, once disarming and comforting, now feels like a disguise stretched too tight over an increasingly cold and calculating core. The truth is clawing its way to the surface. Drew is no longer the man she fell for. He is becoming something else entirely, something darker, something twisted, and Willow is no longer blind to it. What began as a few troubling actions and unanswered questions has snowballed into a crisis of reality. Drew's recent behavior, the secrecy, the manipulation, the veiled threats and orchestrated silences, are no longer isolated incidents. They are a pattern, one that is growing more dangerous with each passing day. And at the center of it all is Willow, caught in a spiral that is threatening to devour everything she once believed in. The discovery that Drew has been subtly controlling Wiley was the breaking point. That realization didn't come with rage or immediate confrontation, it came with a slow, suffocating horror that settled deep in her chest. Wiley was the last pure thing in her life. The only connection she had left to innocence, to purpose, to love that hadn't been stained by betrayal. And now, Drew had poisoned even that. He hadn't yelled, hadn't raised a hand, hadn't left bruises. But what he had done was more insidious. He had manipulated the boy's thoughts, influenced his emotions, and created a reality that served his own interests. Willow saw it in Wiley's shifting behavior, in the subtle changes in his speech, in the way he began to question things she never thought he would question. She saw Drew's fingerprints all over it. And she knew, in her gut, that it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated act. From that moment on, something inside Willow cracked, not in panic, but in silent, deliberate resolve. She began replaying every moment of their relationship. Every, "I love you," every conversation that had ended too quickly. Every time Drew had steered her away from the truth under the guise of protection. It all came flooding back, recontextualized through the lens of manipulation. She had been played, groomed, controlled. And now, she wasn't just the victim of another failed romance, she was the survivor of a psychological ambush. Willow didn't confront him immediately. She watched. She listened. She pretended. Because now she understood that confronting Drew too soon would be dangerous. He wasn't just lying, he was strategic. He anticipated threats. He neutralized challenges. And Willow had no intention of giving him the chance to do either. Her days became a performance. She smiled when he entered the room. She nodded when he spoke. She even kissed him goodnight with the same lips that were silently crafting his downfall. But beneath it all, she was building a case. She began collecting proof, testing boundaries, tracing conversations. She reached out to Sasha, to Michael, to to others who had brushed too close to Drew's manipulation and come away confused, wounded, or changed. And what she discovered chilled her to the bone. Drew wasn't just manipulating her. He had woven himself into the minds and hearts of those around them, planting doubt, reshaping truths, altering perceptions with surgical precision. He had told Michael half-truths, gaslit Sasha into questioning her own memories, and even managed to convince Carly to support his version of events. The scale of his manipulation was no longer personal, it was systemic. And Willow realized that if she didn't stop him soon, there would be nothing left to salvage. But stopping Drew would require more than evidence. It would require courage. It would require her to become someone she never imagined she'd have to be. Because this wasn't just about telling the truth anymore, it was about survival. She started writing down everything she couldn't say aloud. She locked documents in encrypted files. She began reaching out to people outside of Port Charles, names from the past who had seen Drew in moments he thought had been forgotten. Slowly, quietly, she built a story. One that, when unleashed, could destroy him. But there was a cost. Every moment she spent gathering information felt like a betrayal of who she used to be. There were days she stared into the mirror and no longer recognized herself. Her eyes, once wide with optimism and forgiveness, now looked sharper, colder, more calculating. Drew had turned her into someone else, and maybe that was the worst part of all. She had become a reflection of the very thing she hated, strategic, manipulative, willing to do whatever it took to win. And yet, there was no other way. Because now, Drew was crossing lines faster than she could stop him. He was gaslighting Wiley, lying to Michael, keeping secrets from Sonny, and spinning false alliances with Nina that no one seemed to see through. Every move he made was another mask, another illusion. And behind all of it, Willow saw the truth. Not just that Drew had changed, but that he had always been this man, waiting for the right moment to reveal himself. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about containment. Drew had become dangerous, not with violence, but with influence. And influence in the wrong hands could ruin lives in ways that left no scars, no witnesses, and no second chances. Willow knew the clock was ticking. She could feel it in every heartbeat, in every silence between them. Something dark was building, and she had to act before it consumed them all. The next time she looked at Drew, she didn't see her fiancé. She didn't see a partner. She saw a storm. A controlled explosion waiting to detonate. And she knew, deep in her soul, that the only way to stop it was to light the fuse herself. Because this wasn't just a relationship gone wrong. This was war. And Willow, shattered, awakened, and dangerously calm, was ready to fight. Willow is on the edge now, drifting between fragments of a reality she no longer recognizes and the suffocating weight of a truth that is finally too loud to ignore. The realization hits her not like a sudden blow, but like a slow-burning fuse that's finally reached the core of everything she thought she knew. She destroyed her marriage, dismantled her family, alienated the people who truly loved her, all for a man who was nothing more than a masterful liar. A manipulator. A fraud cloaked in charm. A ghost in disguise. And that man is Drew. Again and again. He deceived her, fed her promises laced with poison, looked her in the eye while leading her into darkness, all under the pretense of love. But now the illusion is gone. Shattered. Obliterated. And in its place is something far more terrifying, Willow's mind unraveling into obsession, into madness. This isn't heartbreak anymore. This is psychological collapse. Willow isn't simply mourning the loss of a relationship, she's spiraling into a vortex of rage, guilt, and a hunger for justice so primal it no longer resembles reason. The version of herself that once believed in second chances is gone. In its place stands something far colder, far more calculated. Something dangerous. A new version of Willow is rising from the wreckage, one fueled not by love, but by fury. And she cannot be stopped. The obsession is consuming her, reshaping her thoughts, warping her intentions. She sees Drew's lies now in every moment they shared, hears betrayal in every whisper of memory, feels anger in every beat of silence between them. Her every breath is filled with the need to make him pay, not with a clean break, not with a confrontation, but with destruction. She doesn't want closure. She wants consequence. And this is the turning point. Willow is no longer content to expose Drew, she wants to annihilate him. She wants him to suffer, to break, to lose everything, just as she did. But she won't scream. She won't beg. She'll act with precision. With patience. With the cool, detached focus of someone who has nothing left to lose. That's what makes her terrifying. That's what makes her deadly. Meanwhile, Drew is beginning to feel it, the shift in the air, the tightening of the noose. The person he believed he had control over is slipping beyond his grasp. And in her place is a woman whose silence speaks louder than any threat. He sees it in her eyes. He hears it in her quiet. And for the first time, Drew feels fear. Real fear. Because Willow's obsession has reached its peak, and with it comes chaos. Her mental state has fractured. The guilt she carries for destroying her own family, for choosing the wrong man, for letting herself be fooled, has metastasized into a singular objective: eliminate the source of the infection. And that source is Drew. She's watching him now, tracking his lies, tracing his patterns, mapping out his movements. Every false reassurance he gives only deepens her resolve. Every sweet lie is another nail in his coffin. Willow isn't planning a confrontation. She's planning an ending. Drew, unaware of the storm gathering behind those distant eyes, continues to maneuver, still believing he's one step ahead. But he isn't. He's standing in the middle of a trap he doesn't even know exists. He doesn't see the danger. He doesn't feel the heat. But it's coming. And it will be fatal. Because Willow, in her obsession, has passed a point of no return. She's no longer just unraveling, she's evolving into something that no longer resembles the woman he once knew. She's a mirror cracked beyond repair, reflecting back every lie, every manipulation, every wound he left on her soul. And now, those cracks are forming sharp edges. This is more than madness. It's transformation. And as Drew stands on the edge of a final, silent reckoning, the tragedy is clear. He thought he had broken Willow. But all he had done was awaken the most dangerous version of her. And when that version strikes, there will be no mercy. Only ruin. What's coming isn't just personal. It's a disaster. A death not just of a man, but of everything he stood for. And it's already too late to stop it. Nina and Willow now find themselves locked in a fragile, volatile silence, one that trembles with every passing glance, every unspoken truth, and every fracture beneath the surface of their strained relationship. What once stood as a delicate attempt at reconciliation has twisted into something far more dangerous. A collision course between two women bound by blood but divided by secrets, resentment, and a rapidly unraveling sense of control. The bond that was supposed to bring healing is now soaked in mistrust, and it's clear to both that something inside Willow is shifting, breaking in slow, deliberate pieces. Willow is no longer the quiet, forgiving woman desperately seeking peace. Her eyes now carry a storm, and Nina, intuitive and haunted by her own guilt, can see it. There is something unhinged simmering beneath Willow's calm exterior, something Nina can't name but deeply fears. Their conversations grow shorter, colder. Willow's voice is softer. But every word feels like a blade, carefully chosen, precisely aimed. Nina senses the danger in her daughter's new silence, the way she watches, calculates, and withdraws. It's not grief anymore. It's metamorphosis. The kind that turns pain into something far more corrosive. What terrifies Nina most is that she's seen this before, not in Willow, but in herself. That same obsession with control. With reclaiming what was lost, with punishing those who failed to protect. She sees reflections of her own past rage flickering now in Willow's every movement. But this time, the target is not the world, it's a singular man. Drew. And Mina knows, with horrifying clarity, that Willow is slipping into a space where morality no longer matters. Where obsession and revenge become indistinguishable from purpose. The tension between mother and daughter becomes unbearable. Mina tries to intervene gently at first, asks questions, offers support. Pleads for truth, but Willow shuts her out with an icy calm that chills to the bone. She smiles when she has to. She nods when expected. But her thoughts are elsewhere, somewhere darker. Somewhere Nina cannot follow. And that is where the fear begins to bloom. Willow is not just lost. She is transforming. What was once sorrow is now strategy. What was once weakness has become silence with sharp teeth. The future Willow is marching toward no longer holds light. It's a shadowed path paved with disillusionment, rage, and the terrifying freedom of having nothing left to protect. She has burned her bridges, abandoned her safety nets, and now she is walking willingly into chaos, with only vengeance and obsession as her guides. Nina can see the trajectory. She knows where this leads. Not to closure. Not to healing. But to a point of no return. A dark place where a daughter may finally become a stranger, worse, a destroyer of everything she once cherished. The fear in Nina's chest is no longer about saving Willow. It's about surviving the moment when Willow finally lets go of who she was and embraces what she's becoming. And as Nina watches this unraveling, helpless to stop it, one truth becomes impossible to ignore: this isn't just a phase. This is the beginning of Willow's descent into a future without mercy, without light, and without a way back.